There are forms of hidden hatred that leave almost no visible trace on the outside, yet go very deep inside. They do not always humiliate you directly. They do not always argue with you. They do not even have to raise their voice. But over time, they begin to wear down your self-worth, your sense of value, and your inner stability. My name is Brian Vale. And in this third and final part, we come to the signs that work in the quietest, subtlest, and therefore most dangerous ways. This is no longer just a conversation about difficult people or complicated relationships. It is a conversation about how some people slowly try to weaken the way you see yourself. If you did not watch the first two parts, this conversation will still stand on its own. But this is where the series reaches its deepest point, because now we are talking about things that do not just affect you from the outside. They begin to interfere with the way you see your achievements, your words, and even your own presence around other people. There are people who cannot bear to see your success. There are people who twist everything you say until you begin doubting your own speech. And there are people around whom you suddenly feel as if you do not exist at all, even while sitting right in front of them. And that is where we begin today, with a sign that can seem almost ordinary at first, almost harmless. But in reality, it reveals a great deal about a person, especially about what they feel when they look at your results.
Sign 7 is the luck auditor. The pattern itself is simple but deeply corrosive. Imagine that you worked for something for a very long time, step by step, day by day. You built your life, your work, your body, your profession, your reputation. You put in effort, time, and patience. You denied yourself the easy road. You went through mistakes, exhaustion, setbacks, and doubt. And then one day you finally reach a result. You achieve something, you build something, you earn something real. And in that moment, naturally, you expect a close person to say something simple and honest. Something like, "I saw how hard you worked, you earned this." Or, "Yes, it was hard for you, but you got through it." In other words, you expect them to recognize your path, your work, your authorship in your own life. But instead, you hear a cold, diminishing phrase, "Well, you just got lucky." Or, "With advantages like yours, anyone could have done it."
Or, "You just had the right circumstances." On the surface, it can sound almost ordinary, as if the person is simply making an observation, but in reality, a sentence like that often hides a very precise attempt to take away your right to your own victory. That is why I call this person the luck auditor. This is someone who cannot calmly admit that you reached a result through effort, discipline, character, or sound decisions. They need to rewrite your story so that the main author is not you, but chance, fate, genetics, circumstances, other people's help, anything at all, as long as it is not you. Why do people like this do it? Because admitting your effort is too painful for them. If they honestly say, "Yes, you worked hard and you really earned what you got," then they are forced into an uncomfortable question about themselves. What did I do? Why didn't I go that same way? Why didn't I hold on, get serious, or follow through? And instead of stepping into that inner conflict, it is easier for them to deny your strength and reduce it. So they protect their self-esteem at your expense. They turn your work into luck, so their own passivity does not look so pathetic. It is as if they are saying, "This is not your achievement. You just drew a winning ticket." And if you hear that again and again, the effect can go very deep, because sooner or later, a person starts doubting themselves. They begin thinking, maybe it really was not me. Maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I am not worth that much if everything I have can be explained away as chance. And that is how, step by step, something like imposter syndrome begins to grow. You stop fully believing in your right to the result. You stop feeling your own strength as something real. You start apologizing for your achievements or minimizing them inside yourself, so you do not provoke the people who cannot bear to see you grow. There is a story I remember very clearly because it showed me the true price of words like these. On the edge of our town there stood an old warehouse, half collapsed, long abandoned, almost useless to anyone. Parts of the roof had fallen in. The wood was rotting. The wind moved straight through it. People said no sane person would take on a place like that. Too much work, too little chance, too far gone to save. But one young man stepped forward. Let's call him Ethan. He did not come from money. He did not have serious support. He did not have a fallback plan. All he had were 2 hands, stubbornness, and a willingness to hold on to the work as if there were no other life available to him. He made an agreement to try restoring the warehouse and pay his way later, out of whatever he could earn from it.
People laughed at him. They said he was walking into a hopeless situation, that a place like that could only break a man, not make one. But Ethan did not argue. He simply moved in and started working. I remember how people would come by to watch him almost the way they watch a curiosity. He hauled heavy beams, repaired the structure, worked in cold, mud, and damp air, slept very little, ate modestly, saved money on everything. 1 year passed, then another. And during that time you could see how much a person can end up paying with the body for what he is building with his hands. His palms turned rough and hard, his back grew tired, his face looked older, but he did not stop. Then one morning the whole town saw something they had not expected to see. The place was alive again. The warehouse was functioning. Business began to move through it. And after some time, people started coming to Ethan because he was doing solid work. Gradually, money came.
Then a house, then respect, then that quiet, steady confidence that belongs to a person who knows exactly what his place has cost him. And there was another man in town. Let's call him Nathan. Nathan was the son of a wealthy merchant. He did not push himself much in life. He liked to talk, complain about circumstances, and explain other people's success by anything except their effort. And one day, when Ethan passed by in a new carriage, well-dressed, visibly changed by the life he had built, Nathan was sitting with a few others and said with a smirk, "Yeah, sure. He just got lucky. He was in the right place at the right time. Found a good break. That's the whole story." And a few people around him nodded right away, because phrases like that are always easy for those who also find it more comfortable to believe in luck than in discipline. And that was when the lie inside those words became impossible to miss. People were not looking at the 2 years of cold, fatigue, risk, and labor. They were only looking at the result. The carriage, the house, the visible side of success. And that is exactly why it was so easy for them to call it luck. Because the word luck allows a person not to look at the price. Since then, I have held on to one thing very firmly. Luck does exist. Circumstances do matter. But the person who immediately erases your effort and replaces it with the word lucky is usually not being objective. Usually they are speaking from envy, or weakness, or from a refusal to admit that another person's result belongs to that other person. So if there is someone around you who constantly explains away your achievements as chance, stars, help from others, or good starting conditions, do not rush to argue. Very often the argument is useless. That person does not want to see the truth. They only want one thing, for your victory to stop looking like yours. Just know the value of your effort. Remember what you went through. Do not hand other people the right to rewrite your story, because if you start believing their version of your success, you lose more than the joy of the result. You lose contact with your own strength. That is why the luck auditor is not just an irritated commentator in your life. It is a person trying to steal your authorship, and with it, a piece of your inner foundation.
Sign 8 is distortion of meaning. Sometimes, around a certain person, a strange feeling begins to appear. No matter what you say, it starts to sound different from what you actually meant. The most neutral words suddenly land like a jab. The warmest ones are heard as hidden mockery, and the simplest explanations become a reason for offense. This is one of the most exhausting signs of hidden hostility. Some people even have a name for this kind of person, the hostile interpreter, because around them, conversation stops being a conversation very quickly. It becomes a situation where almost any sentence you say can be turned against you. And this is not about accidental misunderstanding. A person like this does not really hear your words. They hear an opportunity, another chance to feel offended, accuse you, and place you in the position of the one who now has to explain, soften, and defend yourself.
Before long, you begin to feel that around them, every word becomes dangerous. Take a simple example. You come home tired and say, "I'm exhausted. I just want to sit in silence for half an hour." A normal person hears exactly that you are tired, that you need a little quiet. But a person who deliberately distorts the meaning of your words hears something else. They hear, "I don't want to see you. You irritate me. I hate being around you." And instead of an ordinary evening, a conflict begins. One where you are forced to explain something you never meant in the first place. Or take another example. You say to someone, "That shirt looks great on you. You look younger in it." And the answer comes back cold. "So I usually look old and terrible?" And now your compliment has been turned into an insult. Your good intention has been turned into a reason for offense. And you are left confused, wondering whether maybe you really did say something wrong. But in most cases, the problem is not that you are expressing yourself badly, and it is not that the other person just misunderstood you by accident. Very often, this is a deliberate pattern. A person like this does not listen in order to understand. They listen in order to find a reason to be offended, a reason to make you guilty, a reason to turn you once again into the one who has to justify yourself, soften your words, and apologize. And there is a very real kind of power hidden inside that. As long as you are explaining yourself, you are underneath. As long as you are rushing to clarify that you didn't mean it that way, the other person gets to keep the moral advantage. They are the wounded one, the offended one, the supposed victim, and you are the one who has to keep proving that you meant no harm. Life around a person like this slowly starts to feel like walking through a minefield. You begin rehearsing your words in advance. You become afraid to joke, afraid to be direct, afraid to bring up problems, afraid even to stay silent, because silence can also be twisted against you, and after a while you start noticing something else. You begin shrinking, speaking less, showing less, becoming quieter. Not because you have nothing to say, but because around this person your natural voice is too easily turned into a weapon against you.
There is a story that taught me exactly how this kind of person works. In our town, there were two fabric merchants. One was named Andrew. He was open, warm, and fairly direct. Sometimes too direct, perhaps, but there was no hidden poison in the way he spoke. The other was named Simon. Simon was suspicious, easily offended, and always searching for a hidden meaning. He was the kind of man whose face looked as if the world had already insulted him even before the day had properly begun. The two of them had worked side by side for years. Out of simple goodwill, Andrew thought of Simon as something like a friend. Then one year, a poor harvest drove fabric prices sharply upward, and good cloth became difficult to find. Somehow, Andrew managed to secure a strong supply at the old price. He was genuinely happy about it because he knew how rare an opportunity like that was. And the first thing he decided to do was offer part of that supply to Simon, so the man could make money too. He went into Simon's shop and said with complete sincerity, "Simon, I got lucky and found good cloth at the old price. I know business hasn't been going that well for you lately. Take part of the shipment at the same price I paid. We can both make something." At first glance, there is nothing insulting in that. A man is offering help, sharing an opportunity, extending a hand. But the moment Simon heard it, his face changed. He went pale, then red, and then erupted. He slammed the scissors in his hand onto the counter and shouted so loudly that people on the street began turning toward the noise. "So that's what this is? You came here to humiliate me? To show me I can't manage on my own? So I should spend the rest of my life feeling indebted to you? Business hasn't been going that well? So now you've decided to announce to everyone that I'm at the bottom? Take your cloth and get out. I won't let you make me look pathetic." Andrew stood there in total shock. He tried to explain. He tried to say that he meant nothing like that he was being sincere, that he honestly wanted to help. But the more he tried to explain himself, the more firmly Simon settled into the role of the offended and righteous one. That was when I understood something very clearly. The hostile interpreter does not simply hear your words. They run them through their resentment, their envy, their suspicion, their own inner darkness. And what comes out the other side is no longer what you said. It is whatever serves them best. Your "I want to help" becomes "I want to humiliate you." Your "I'm tired" becomes "I can't stand you." Your "you look good" becomes "you usually look bad." And when you are dealing with someone like that, there is one thing you have to understand. You are not required to spend your life proving the purity of your intentions to someone who has already decided to see you as an enemy. Because the problem is not the precision of your words. The problem is that the other person is inwardly committed to turning them into poison. Over time, that became impossible for me to ignore. There are people you cannot explain your goodwill to because goodwill is not what they are looking for. They are looking for material for accusation. And the more you try to correct the distortion, the deeper you get pulled into their game. So if there is someone around you who constantly twists your words into the worst possible meaning, stop apologizing endlessly. Stop hoping that one more careful sentence, one more softened explanation, one more perfectly measured phrase will finally fix it. Very often, it will fix nothing. Because what you are facing is not a misunderstanding. You are facing a person for whom your guilt is useful. And in that kind of situation, one of the most important forms of self-respect is this: do not hand them the right to define the meaning of your words. Speak clearly, speak calmly. But if you see that everything you say is always turned into a reason to strike at you, step back. Not because you have nothing to say, but because not every conversation deserves your voice. Sign 9 is sudden deafness. We often think hostility means someone raises their voice, argues with us, says something sharp, or attacks us openly. But there is another form of hidden dislike that works much more quietly, and because of that, it often hurts more. I call this sign sudden deafness. Of course, I am not talking about actual hearing problems, and not about ordinary distraction, which can happen to anyone. I mean something else. I mean the moment when a person hears you perfectly well, but acts as if your voice does not deserve a response, as if your words can simply be left hanging, as if you are not important enough to be heard the first time. The pattern is very simple. You speak to someone. You are sitting right next to them. There is no distance, no noise, no real obstacle. You ask something, share a piece of news, make a simple request, and in return, nothing. The person keeps looking at their phone, eating, scrolling, reading, staring out the window. They do not react, as if your voice does not exist at all. And what happens next? Almost always the same thing. First, you assume they probably just did not hear you. Then you repeat yourself, a little louder, a little more carefully, then again. And before long, you are no longer simply speaking. You are trying to earn the right to be heard. You start looking into their face, trying to catch their eye, raising your voice, as if you are not asking for a simple answer, but for a favor. And only after the second or third attempt does the person slowly turn toward you and say, with that dull, empty expression, something like, Did you say something? Or, sorry, I was distracted. And this is the moment when it becomes very important to understand something. That is not always the truth. Because sudden deafness is often not a lack of attention. It is a display of hierarchy, a very subtle one, but a very unpleasant one. You are made to repeat yourself so that you can feel your lower position for yourself, so that you spend more energy, so that you experience that small inner humiliation. I spoke, and I was not heard. I repeated myself, and I still was not noticed. Only on the third attempt was I finally allowed to exist in the conversation. Without saying it directly, a person like this is communicating something very clear. Your voice carries no weight. If you want my attention, you will have to work harder for it. And if this happens again and again, it starts to work on you at a deep level. You begin doubting yourself. You start wondering, maybe I speak at the wrong time. Maybe what I say does not matter. Maybe I am interrupting. Maybe I should stop reaching out so often. And that is how, step by step, a person begins to erase themselves. Not because they have nothing to say, but because someone has trained them to feel that their voice is somehow extra, unwanted, too small to deserve an answer. I remember one story that made the meaning of this sign land very differently for me. In those years, we often had guests in the house. Some came for advice, some came to discuss business, some came simply to talk. And there was one man, let's call him Henry. Henry was very wealthy, very self-assured, and carried himself as if the space around him belonged to him. And there was also a distant relative, let's call him Boris. Boris had worked with books his whole life. He was quiet, intelligent, educated, but also a very timid man. One day at a large family dinner, Boris ended up sitting at the same table as Henry. Wanting to show respect, Boris politely turned to him and said, "Henry, I heard you recently opened a new warehouse. That's a major thing for the whole district." Henry was sitting directly across from him. He kept eating, looking ahead, and did not react at all. Not once. He did not raise his eyes. He did not nod. He gave not even the smallest sign that he had heard a word. Boris became embarrassed. He assumed Henry was focused on his food, or maybe truly had not heard. He waited a little and repeated himself, slightly louder this time. "Henry, I was asking about the warehouse. I hear it turned out very well." But again, nothing. Henry kept eating, poured himself some wine, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and behaved as if no one was sitting in front of him. Around the table, that heavy tension began to settle, the kind that appears when everyone already understands what is happening, but no one wants to name it aloud. Boris turned red, grew visibly nervous, and finally, almost in desperation, leaned forward and said more loudly, "Henry, can you hear me?" Only then did Henry slowly turn his head, let his eyes pass over him and say, "Oh, was that a question for me? I didn't realize. What was it you said exactly?" After that, Boris stayed silent for the rest of the evening. He sat with his eyes lowered to his plate, and you could see how deeply it had crushed him. Not because anyone argued with him, not because he had been openly insulted, but because something very clear had been shown to him. Your voice is not even worth a first response. And that was when I understood just how cruel this kind of behavior can be. Because it does not strike at your words. It strikes at the very fact of your presence. It says, in effect, you are here, but you might as well not be. And that is one of the most painful things you can do to another person. Over time, I learned one simple thing. If you speak to someone in an ordinary, quiet situation, and they do not answer you the first time even though they easily could have, sometimes their silence is already the answer. And that answer sounds like this: "I do not consider you worthy of immediate attention." So if you notice this sudden deafness in someone around you, do not rush to humiliate yourself by repeating everything. Do not raise your voice just to fight your way through somebody else's contempt. Do not turn yourself into someone who has to beg for a response. Keep your dignity. If you were not heard once in a situation where you could not possibly have been missed, take that seriously. Because your voice should not depend on someone else's pride, and not every person deserves your attention. And now, just as I promised from the beginning, we come to the most important idea in this series. A great many people spend their whole lives making the same mistake. They assume that hidden hostility appears because they did something wrong, because they made some mistake, because they somehow provoked irritation, envy, or coldness in another person. They think that if only they were easier, softer, quieter, simpler, less visible, then the attacks would lessen. But over time, I came to understand something that changes a great deal. Very often, people do not hate us for our weaknesses. They hate us for something alive, whole, and real in us, for our calm, for our discipline, for our growth, for our ability to keep moving forward, for the simple fact that next to us, It becomes too hard for them not to see their own emptiness, weakness, or inner disorder. That is why hidden hatred is so often directed not at what is wrong in you, but at what is strong in you. Not at your failures, but at your signs of life. Not at the places where you are broken, but at the places where you stood back up. The person who constantly reduces your achievements often cannot bear the fact that you are moving forward. The person who twists your words often cannot tolerate your clarity. The person who acts as if they do not hear you is often trying not to acknowledge your weight. And the person who keeps trying to make you smaller is almost always reacting painfully to the fact that you are no longer small. That is why it is so important to stop treating another person's hidden hostility as a final verdict about you. Very often, it is not a sign of your worthlessness at all, quite the opposite. It often points to your strength. Another person's strength would inspire them. Yours exposes what they do not want to confront in themselves. And that leads to the central question. What do you do with all of this? How do you stop another person's hostility from slowly poisoning your life? The answer is not revenge. It is not giving them the same treatment back. It is not throwing yourself into endless explanations, arguments, and attempts to prove your innocence, because that is often exactly what people driven by hidden hostility are waiting for. They want your reaction, your breakdown, your pain, your need to justify yourself, your helplessness. But the moment you stop feeding them that, something changes. The moment you begin to see clearly who is in front of you and stop bringing that person your trust, your warmth, your openness, and your energy, their influence over you starts to weaken. That is the central idea. Do not feed another person's hostility with yourself. Do not offer yourself up to someone else's envy, arrogance, or inner emptiness. Do not try to convince the person who does not want to understand. Do not try to melt the person who takes pleasure in being cold. And do not try to earn warmth in a place where people want you weaker, smaller, and quieter. The strongest thing you can do is keep yourself intact. Keep your dignity. Keep your peace. Keep your rhythm. Keep your inner ground. Because the person who fails to destroy you from the inside is eventually forced to face the one thing that hurts them most, the fact that you remained whole. And now, let's bring the whole series together. We walked through 9 signs of hidden hatred: the time thief, information withholding, toxic positivity, name distortion, the exposure of secrets, exclusion from the circle, the luck auditor, distortion of meaning, and sudden deafness. All of these things can take different forms. Sometimes they sound like a joke, sometimes like an accident, sometimes like awkwardness, sometimes like a personality quirk. But when you put them together, one thing becomes clear. Hidden hatred almost always tries to do the same thing. It tries to strip you of your inner footing, your clarity, your sense of your own value. It tries to push you into doubting yourself instead of seeing who is standing in front of you. That is why your task is not to please everyone, not to explain yourself to everyone, not to win love from people who feed on making you smaller. Your task is to learn to see, to recognize coldness behind a smile, control behind care, humiliation behind a joke, contempt behind silence. Because your soul is not a public hallway, your dignity is not a toy for someone else's games, and your life is far too valuable to hand over to people who enter it not with warmth, but with quiet poison. If Brian Vale's words resonated with you, support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments which of these 9 signs you have seen most often in your own life, and at what moment you realized that the person in front of you was not just difficult, but quietly hostile. Take care of yourself, protect your inner light, and never let another person's coldness convince you that something is wrong with you.